Hello, 7th grade. Welcome to Wednesday. Okay, today our lesson is going to be pretty short. We're just talking about fiction versus nonfiction. So, fiction, you guys probably already know all this, but it's a good review. Fiction is writing about imaginary people, places, and or events. All right, pretty simple. Nonfiction is writing about real people, places, and events. We did a whole thing on nonfiction recently, so you guys should be very well acquainted with what nonfiction is and how it works. Now, if you'll notice, I wrote and or up here by fiction. So, sometimes fiction can include real people, real places, or events. This is usually called historical fiction. So if you're writing a story about a made-up character during the Revolutionary War, you're going to mention people like George Washington, places like Virginia, events like the Battle of Bunker Hill. All of these things will be mentioned and be a part of your story, but the things that happen to your character, the people they interact with, the places they go, those might be made up. So you can have a little bit of fact in your fictional story, but it still includes something that's made up, and so we call it fiction. Okay. Both of them include, if you're writing a story that is fictional or a story that is nonfiction, they both use narrative writing. Now, narrative writing is any writing that tells some type of story. If you'll notice, narrative sounds like the word narrator, because they both have that same root word of narrate, which means to tell a story. So, if you are going to use narrative writing, you're telling the story. So fiction and nonfiction, they both can use narrative writing if you're telling a story with them. So let's look at some of the differences between a fiction story and a nonfiction story. We kind of already talked about these, but a fiction story has imagined people, events, and or places. Some of the stuff might be real from history, but all of it is going to be, but some of it, forgive me, some of it is going to be made up. With nonfiction story, all of it is true. All real people, all real events, all real places. Okay, both of them overlap to include narrative writing, which has a narrator. You've got to have someone telling the story. Maybe it's in third person, which means the narrator can tell you about multiple characters and what they're going through. Maybe it's in first person, which is where the narrator just tells you about one person and what they're going through. Okay. You can have characters. When we see the word characters, we often think of fiction, that they're made up. But any person, animal, or thing that can think for itself is a character. And so in a nonfiction story, then any person from history or person from real life counts as a character. Dialogue. Okay, to go into the root of this word really quick. Log, L-O-G-U-E, that's a Latin word that means speech or something written down. Dia, this prefix means two, and so dialogue means speech or writing between two people. If you've heard the word monologue, which is where like a character goes up on stage for a play and they just say a whole big speech to the crowd, that's a monologue because it's one person speaking, sort of on their own. Okay, so you've also got story events. Now, usually when we think of story events, we call this plot if we're talking about a fiction story. But if we're talking about a nonfiction story as well, we've got to call it story events. These are just the things that happen in the story to keep it moving. And then we've got the theme or the central idea. The theme has to do mostly with fiction because remember, a theme is a statement about life or a life lesson that the author is trying to communicate to you with how their story plays out. A central idea is like that, but it's just, the main focus or the main topic or idea the author is trying to communicate to you through their real story. If I wrote a story about the Revolutionary War, my central idea might just be the Revolutionary War happened. That's okay. That counts as a central idea. So, fiction stories and nonfiction stories have their differences here and here, but they both include narrative writing, which has all of these similarities. How they use these similarities is what makes them different, though. So tomorrow we're going to start reading one of two stories. One is nonfiction and one is fiction. One of the stories, the fiction one, is called A Day's Wait. The other one, the one that we're going to read tomorrow, is called Barrio Boy by Ernesto Galarza. and this one is our nonfiction one. We're going to look at how the two compare and how they contrast. How are they the same? How are they different? So this was a pretty short lesson for today. All you need to do is get ready to read tomorrow, and I'll talk to you then. All right.